Okay, our next item is what we heard a lot of comment on this morning is discussion regarding a request to Stanley-Martin for the annexation of the ties. I would like for our attorney, for all the public that's here, to explain the process here and who has the authority to annex or approve annexation or de-annexation.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Unlike a situation where someone petitions for annexation and the town follows a certain procedure and then votes on whether they want to annex a property, the process of de-annexation is quite different. In fact, the only body that has the authority to de-annex a property from a town is the General Assembly, and they generally do that by way of a local act. There's no procedure that we can check all of the boxes on and then, okay, since we've done A, B, C, and D, we are guaranteed a de-annexation. I can't speak for the General Assembly. I can speak from my past experience. Normally, they may consider a de-annexation bill if all of the owners of the property proposed to be de-annexed request it. And then they will also likely seek the input from the town from which the de-annexation is going to occur. So the power to de-annex, we don't have that power here. That's in the General Assembly. And that's kind of an overview of it. I'll be happy to get into any additional questions you or the board may have.
I had a question, just how you explained it is different as I understood it. So the town could make the request of the General Assembly? It doesn't have to be the current owner.
Technically, anybody can make a request. And again, I want to be careful here and stay in my lane. I'm not in the General Assembly.
Okay.
I have seen I'm not aware of any local bill request that's got any traction when the General Assembly didn't, at a minimum, have the input from both the municipality and the affected owners of the property proposed to be de-annexed.
Right. So there is a vehicle to start the process. There is a way to get this process.
Right. You request it.
Yeah.
But what I was distinguishing between, if someone wants to be annexed, they have to file a petition. The clerk then has to certify the sufficiency of that petition. Then there has to be certain public hearings. Then there has to be a vote. Then there has to be an ordinance annexing it. And you also have to have a map of the annexed parcel that has to be on file with the Secretary of State, et cetera, et cetera. De-annexation is kind of more of a request to a member of the General Assembly for a local act, but there's no statutory format that says we've checked all these boxes and therefore we are entitled to have this property de-annexed.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I understand that. So if Stanley-Martin Homes wanted to de-annex, I'm not suggesting that they do. We would have to join that and either agree or oppose, and vice versa. If we did that, they would to get something done, there should be some agreement.
I would say in reality, the member of the General Assembly that would even consider entertaining such a bill is going to want to know what check the town's pulse on that. They're not required to weigh in one way or the other. But I think, for instance, I think you're going to be asked.
Okay.
And that would come from our local representative to the General Assembly, correct?
Whoever is proposing to sponsor the bill, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
So just, and see if you agree with this. Professor Joyce at School of Government, I had emailed with a while back, and just to kind of sum it up, he says, with regard to de-annexation, I'm afraid that can only happen by legislative act. It is something that happens regularly. There are usually several de-annexation bills each legislative session, and several get through. But the law does not provide any other process. The de-annexation does not technically need to be proposed by the developer, but as a matter of practice, the General Assembly rarely, if ever, de-annexes without property owner consent.
That's the difference between a dumb lawyer like me and a professor. But yeah, I tried to say exactly that. So,
That professor probably hadn't been in court on one side.
Probably not.
but yeah, that's essentially what I was saying.
So I asked that this be put on the agenda because, as you can see from the folks who've talked today and people I've talked to over the last several months, They would like us to investigate every opportunity to reverse the possibility of voting rights off island for all of the reasons that people have mentioned here. So, I'd love to know if anybody disagrees with doing what we can to try and reverse this.
I think we've heard from the population what they want. So I think it's incumbent upon us to move forward.
Let me ask you a few questions. You and I have had this conversation,
Yeah.
and I know that you called Stanley-Martin's representative during the election
Correct.
and had a discussion with him
Correct.
about being de-annexed, I assume.
Correct.
I don't know what all your discussion was, but I know after that, he called our inspections department and questioned whether the town had the staff and could take care of that many building permits. So in assuring him that our town could do that and had done that, I called him and had that discussion with him. Now, you shared with me that this representative told you that they wish to stay in the city limits. That is certainly what he said to me during my conversation. So if we go back and ask him today, again, if they would consider the annexation, and they say no, what do you want to do after that?
I think I'd like to cross that bridge when we come to it, because I'd hate to get distracted on next steps when we haven't done the first step. A couple of things that came out. The gentleman's name is Alex Capps, and he is the Director of Land Acquisition for the Coastal and Raleigh region. So he did get back to me, and he said that first off, he was surprised that our citizens would be against this. He thought that Ocean Isle Beach loved them. So I unfortunately had to give him the news that we may love them, but not necessarily what's going on right now. And he said that they would try and find a way to figure out a way to appease the town. When he came back to me after having spoken to several people within his organization, he did say they were not interested in de-annexation, and he gave me two reasons why. One of those is that they estimate it will be $30,000 to $40,000 in additional value per home by having an OIB zip code. They will have an OIB zip code, as I understand it. So I'm not sure that first argument has anything of relevance. The second was that our planning department is much easier to deal with than the county planning department, which of course we have the best planning department in the state. So, of course, no surprise there. But I do believe that if those are their two reasons, that we do have an opportunity to negotiate with them and try and find out, what might, give them some incentive to de-annex and try and meet the will of our people. And so I think that it's at least worth a shot. So
I just want y'all to be informed. I want y'all to know what, I know Mike thinks he has arguments he wants to make. I'm looking at a developer side here, maybe, and Keith, you chime in. These people have already made a plan, and this town has approved a preliminary subdivision. That's not final approval, but a preliminary subdivision, and have said, okay, this meets our zoning requirements. If they have to start over with the county, I'm assuming they're going to have to start over with another preliminary plan, because I'm unsure whether this plan they have meets the county's zoning or not. So certainly that is an expense to them.
Mhm.
Whether it's one they wish to take, all right. But, if we go and say, we want you out because we don't want your potential residents to vote over here, I don't know what kind of reaction we'll get. Do you have anything to add to that?
And that's correct. And I think it was last week, actually, I received a call from one of their designers, and they were asking about our standards for development. So, they are still actively pursuing our standards for their plan. And if they did go to the county, they would have to change. Yep.
And somebody said this morning, I do want everybody to understand, they are in our fire district. Whether they're in our city limits or not, we're going to service them for fire.
Yep.
We will service them for police protection as well if they're in our city limits. We will not if they're outside of city limits. But our police drive by that property on a daily basis because Ocean Isle Beach Park is in Ocean Isle Beach's city limits. it's in our city limits because we owned it and donated that property to the county for the construction of that community park there. So we're going to buy it anyway. So it could be an extra expense to drive through that neighborhood, but that's probably minimal. Those people that build out there are probably going to come to the beach anyway. They're going to use our parking. They're going to use our streets. They're going to use the beach, just like our other good neighbors around here. Waterway Cove, the Retreat, Saltwater Palms is within our city limits.
Yeah.
So, you know, as far as infrastructure development, and this was discussed at your planning board meeting, Mike, they're getting the water and their sewer from the county. So they're not impacting our infrastructure except for police protection. So I just want everybody to know the facts here.
If I may, I'm not so sure driving by a property that is undeveloped is nearly the same effort as responding to calls within that area.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But understand too, and I don't know if you want to chime in, Chief, we have mutual aid with the county.
Mhm.
And certainly they know we're right here. If there were a major incident, they might call us for mutual aid if they didn't have somebody close enough by to respond.
Yes, ma'am. We do have mutual aid agreements with the county and Sunset Beach as well. And with the anticipation of this development, we added, that was one of my goals, to offset the shock of the development when people start moving in. Year before last budget cycle, I requested 3 additional officers to help with the population over here and do the transition in that area. So geographically, we'll have more officers working in the area than the county. So police-wise, unless it's a real bad spot, I don't see a lot of uptick there.
Well, that's interesting, though, that you added 3 police officers in anticipation of not only our growth on the island, but also the development out at the tides. And we can kind of discuss offline whether you would need those 3 if the tides weren't built. But I think we're going off on a direction that is a smaller point, and that is the fiscal impact of this. If we estimate the tax base of $350,000 or so that the tides would give us, that is versus a tax base of $21 million, or a budget of $21 million that we currently have in Ocean Isle Beach. So it's a very small percentage, but if they did outnumber us, the voters outnumbered us, they would have control of that $21 million, not the people on the island. And that's something that we need to consider. So I think that, and we're also kind of trying to think for them. They have some cost already on this. Of course they do. But we don't know if the development that they have proposed to us would be the same design as it would be in the county. We can't know that. And if we're going to negotiate with somebody, they're the ones who are going to have to tell us what their needs are and what their costs are and things like that. We cannot think for them. What we have to do is think for the residents of Ocean Isle Beach, and they are pretty much, it sounds like, pretty close to unanimous that they want us to do this, that they want us to approach them and at least make the attempt to have them request the de-annexation. We won't know until we get into those conversations.
I don't know that 6 people that spoke today and a couple that spoke last night are the majority, and I'm not going to argue one way or the other. I just want people to know everything that's going to have to be considered and some things that I think they are going to consider. So as we start moving forward, we know what we're going to be trying to juggle.
Brian, let me ask you a question, just hypothetically here. If we approach them and they say, well, we'll think about it, and if they do end up requesting the annexes and it's granted, they've gone to this expense of having to go back and start all over again, is there any legal liability there on our part that we've misrepresented somewhere down the road?
If the General Assembly enacts a bill, that's an act of the General Assembly, not an act of the town.
Okay.
So I would say no.
But I mean, if they're incurring additional costs to go back and start all over again and pushing their development out a couple of years? Could they hold us liable for anything?
Again, since it's not a town decision, it's an act of the General Assembly, I would say no.
Okay.
Let me make just a couple comments. So I agree with part of my issue is with staff. With the additional homes being built, it is going to be somewhat of a burden, but then I would look that we may have to add other people. I don't know that, but that was my first thought.
I think you, Keith, you correct me if I'm wrong, but your staff has handled over 700 houses permitted in the retreat over the last few years.
That's correct. Yes. I mean, you're looking at the retreat as a similar type development, and current staff is overseeing the construction of those homes in that development.
And to speak to the other issue about them outvoting us, we do have the ability to enact districts within the town that gives some chance of equal representation from island versus off-island voters. And we've had some preliminary discussion about that. You can't do that today because there's no voters out there. So until there are people out there, and I think it's maybe tied to a current census too. So that would be a few years down the road before you could do that. And somebody commented today about the number of residents on Sunset Beach versus their off-island. Well, I asked their mayor that just a couple of months ago. He thinks they have about 10% of their registered voters that live on island. The rest of them live off island. Understand, Sunset's a lot smaller island than we are. So that didn't really surprise me. On island, we've built close to 200 homes in the last 2 years. How many of those turn into permanent residents and voters is not known.
So just to finish up, so the tides, what they would get from being in the town limits is additional tax to the town.
Right. Permitting fees. And
What they will have to pay is additional taxes to the town.
Right.
And part of that tax is placed for police protection that they're already paying by being in Brunswick County for the sheriff's department. As far as them, the preliminary site that we've approved, well, it meets the county. This may be the time to start that conversation. One thought I had was, I know those developers, they want to get something coming out of the ground soon. If we do this in phases, which I'm assuming that we would do, just like we do with the retreat, we may be able to get them started in doing that process. Then everybody make application to de-annex. That way we haven't lost anything. They haven't lost any time. They got some time to make sure their site plan or whatever phases is in comports with whatever the county's ordinance is. The other issue is we kind of got a new board. So there's only one person on the board now that was here when this was done. So there's some different thought process. I think, I've always said nothing ventured, nothing gained. So we're not going to lose anybody, at least looking at the pros and cons and how this happens. I appreciate what you said today. I was always under the impression that the current owner is the only person that can do that, but it sounds like I was wrong in my assumption. So, I know Mike's interested in this. He's had conversation with Mark. I've had conversation with both of them. So I'd make a motion for these two guys to kind of work on this project and with town staff and come up with those pros and cons, do's and don'ts, and how we can move this forward if possible.
Before we go there, I think the developer made sort of a strategic error when they didn't immediately ask to be de-annexed. How many developers do you know of that want to market property and say, by the way, you get to pay town taxes too? It's a real issue.
Right.
But we are where we are today, and during the campaign when I talked to folks about this, I thought, well, it's in the rearview mirror. We have to deal with it now. We've been involved with this now for several years, coming out of COVID and all the things that happened with that. So what can we do? And the question keeps coming back to me, what did they get out of the deal? And we've talked about that already. We've discussed what comes up and services provided and all the things that are going to be part of them being a residents of the town. They get most all those things anyway, except police protection if they're de-annexed. I think we owe it to every constituent on the island to do our best to come up with a way. I'm just not sure that I see a clear way, because the first question I'd ask if I were them is, what's in it for me at this point?
Yeah, they paid a premium.
We
for
paid
this
you a
property.
premium price for the
They
property,
did.
which was a good deal for the
Yes.
town. And we can use that money to do a number of things on the island. But I think, the question becomes, what were you thinking when you did this? Because you're going to have an Ocean Isle Beach address, and you're still going to get the money you think you're going to get for each house regardless, just by having that address.
Mhm.
So we give them an opportunity, I suppose, to give us a reason that they will consider de-annexation. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to try to find a way to look at it.
And let me say one other thing. One thing that they don't get is, and somebody mentioned this, just because they're off island, either in the town limits or not, that doesn't guarantee them a parking spot here, a place to sit on the beach. It doesn't guarantee them anything.
And they're coming anyway.
They're coming anyway. So it's not going to burden us to provide anybody additional parking, particularly those folks. And I just did some quick math as far as the premium. I mean, 241 acres, $11 million is $45,000 an acre. I don't know that that's too far out of whack. I mean, it's probably what that property should have brought.
It's surplus property.
Well, the tax value on it was 3.7 million. They paid 11 million for it.
I understand that, but they also paid $45,000 per acre.
Right,
The
right,
tax value,
right.
you can say your house is tax value. I suspect you could sell it more than that.
Probably, yeah. But how much more? What I'm saying is that they did pay a premium for that property.
Well, and I'd just like to, to clarify a couple of things. And the mayor and I have had some great conversations and very enjoyable conversations, and we do agree to disagree on some of these issues. I keep hearing districts might at least give us a 50-50 chance here. Brian, I think it's very simple, isn't it? It's based upon population, it's based upon the census, and you cannot have districts that favor a less populated area than the more populated area. It's simply put, is that correct? Okay, so we need to be aware of that. The second thing is just to be clear, because Mayor, you said that 6 people or so may not be reflective of the general sentiment. During the campaign, I spoke with hundreds of people. It was near unanimous. There were 3 people who said, well, I'd have to really look at the pros and cons of that deal before I said whether I would have wanted it or not. And of the other hundreds of people that I talked to, every single one of them was against the sale with voting rights included in it. So it's not just people who came to the meeting, and thank you all for coming. But I just want to make sure we're real clear on that, and we'll get back to Tom's motion.
Yeah, what do we think, Mark? I may address this to you. Maybe you've studied this a good bit too. What do you think they would ask to do from us to be de-annexed? You got any idea?
I really don't know what we could do, because, we can't legally incentivize them. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. If we could come up with some way to work with phases, that might be an option. But then you have multiple owners.
Right.
Right now we have 1. So right now would be the time for something to change. I'd have to look at that.
Yeah,
I really don't know what we can do at this point beyond go to them and ask them to consider it.
As I understand it, we legally cannot pay them anything.
That's my understanding.
If I may jump in, well, just real quick, if I could jump in, okay? If we're talking about approaching Stanley-Martin homes, we should not be negotiating in public. So some of the what ifs and trying to think of what Stanley-Martin Homes thinks or doesn't think or would be incented by or doesn't, I think is inappropriate in this conversation, because the topic on the table is to approach them. And it is when we go to
Right.
approach them, we will find these answers. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
All right, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if you want me to address the question of economic appropriation for incentive, I will.
Yes.
It's under the economic appropriation statute is General Statute 158.7.1. And that sets out the criteria when a town can appropriate incentives to bring something to the town. And it's a pretty stringent statute, and you have to show the benefit the town's going to get. In my legal opinion, it's not lawful to go the other way, to pay someone to, sounds funny, get out of town.
Yeah.
Particularly because theoretically, and I'm not going to get into the debate of whether the tax base increase and the sales tax increase and the permitting fees received from the town equate to the cost of providing those services. That's beyond what I'm talking about now. But in my legal opinion, you cannot provide taxpayer funds to incentivize someone to leave the town, in particular, since it's no guarantee. I mean, you could, even if we could do it, you could offer them $5 million, but until the General Assembly passes the local act. Nothing. I mean, can you imagine, we're going to give you, pick a number, $1 million to ask to be de-annexed. They get their $1 million, they ask the General Assembly, and the General Assembly says, we're not
Not
interested.
doing it.
I mean, that would be a colossal waste of taxpayers' funds, and I think it would also violate the North Carolina Constitution. So my legal opinion is that you cannot incentivize them financially to leave.
Hey,
And
Brian,
is
just
the
one more-
burden on changing and getting de-annexation done when it actually involves a potential, and I just call it potential today, of voting rights? Does that impact it in the legislature?
Well, they're going to get voting rights.
Right, but I mean, if you know that you're going to go to the legislature and ask for de-annexation, knowing that at some point there would be voters buying that property, what does that do to their interest in going forward?
To the General Assembly's
Yeah.
interests. Again, I can't speak for them. My experience has been to even consider something like that. By and large, they want to hear from all of the affected property owners that would be de-annexed, and they want to check the pulse of that municipality.
Hey, Brian, one more question. I think Mark Robinson brought this issue up. Is that, we border our town property with the park. Is that 241 acres, could that be brought into the ETJ? They would still get the same thing they're getting for being in the town.
I'm not following the question.
Could we expand
I'm
the
not sure
ETJ?
if we can,
If it's got to be,
I
Jason.
thought it was outside the
corporate,
ETJ.
I think our ETJ is representative of our corporate limits. And
Primary.
That's our,
Primary corporate.
yeah, that's our satellite limit, so I don't think
So
we
it's-
have the ability to expand the
So it's too
ETJ.
far away.
Yes, sir. We can only expand
Away
by our
from the mile.
population.
Yeah,
mile.
that's where I was at.
From the
Yes,
from the primary.
That would have to come from the county, Justin, if we even
I don't think the
approached it.
county
The county
would allow
probably
us
wouldn't grant that. to-
No, I think we had a hard enough time getting properties
Yeah.
that were partially in our ETJ
Exactly.
already, so.
Right.
So I just want to pick up on the one word that was most important that I heard you say. Many of them are important, but financially, we cannot incent them financially. Okay, well, we would keep that in mind as we're negotiating with them. All right, that's a no-no. But there are many other ways potentially to work with them depending upon what their needs are. And we'll only know that if we talk to them and find out. So again, we just circle back to, are we going to approach Stanley-Martin Homes, on Tom's motion? And then we're going to get all these answers only if we go through that process.
All right. Any further discussion? We have a motion on the table to approach Stanley-Martin. Do I hear a second?
I'll say-
And that was to be done by Mike and Mark.
Right.
Is that correct? Is that part of the motion?
Well, part of it is for them to do the background work before we even get to that point.
I thought we were going to have some discussion.
Right.
Details about how to go about approaching them.
Exactly.
Right.
That's part of the motion.
Not just start calling, just make sure we understand all the
Well,
ins
we've
and
already
outs.
done that, so we don't need to go there again.
Hold on, so what's
Well, I
the,
think we've done that today.
yeah, what's the motion? I just, can you
Can you restate your motion?
To appoint Mike Ward and Mark
Mike
Collins
Wade.
to do the research. And I guess basically probably report back to us, maybe in an executive session.
No, this is an executive session issue, is it, Mr.
Well, then
Attorney?
we can make it public, but we don't need to talk about negotiating strategies. Just how we can go about doing this, what's the best way to do it, and what are our options? And then make a decision then to make contact and maybe have a meeting, these two guys, with the representative from or from Stanley-Martin Homes.
Well, I don't think that necessarily will work off the top of my head, because what we need to do is talk to Stanley-Martin. So the question is, who is talking to Stanley-Martin?
But
So it's not just in us investigating what our approach might be. It's really, we will approach Stanley-Martin, you and I, and find out
With
what their
the-
needs are.
With the input from the board.
Of course. Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So the motion is to have Commissioner Wade and Commissioner Holland approach Stanley-Martin. There was a lot of talk.
With the request,
Like with the wishes of the board,
Well, my motion is for those to be the point
right?
people to deal with Stanley-Martin Homes.
And then we'll report back to the board. I mean, nothing's going to be done without board approval. It's just, let's find out what's going on. And that's Mr. Ward, please. Thank you.
And I do believe this is going to involve some discussion with Brian concerning options.
Those
It's a
discussions,
broad word.
those, to the extent they are legal implications or legal questions, those discussions would be appropriate in executive session.
Okay.
all right, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
No opposed? Thank you very much.